Before we start, hit subscribe and drop comment if you love these stories. All right, today's one is absolutely crazy. Let's dive in.
My wife left because everything worked. The bills were paid. The house was quiet. The marriage was stable, and to her, stability felt like suffocation. So one night she took the money, left a note about choosing herself, and disappeared. The police logged it. The court processed it. The system moved on. 21 months later, I saw her again by accident, working a diner shift she never imagined for herself. I didn't speak to her. I didn't follow her to save her. I just watched because some people don't need to be stopped. They need exactly what they choose. She was never wrong. Sarah Mitchell had never been wrong in any way that mattered. This was not a belief she announced out loud. That would have been ego. It was simply the operating system under which she lived. Wrongness to Sarah was a temporary condition other people experienced, usually right before they corrected themselves using her advice. She believed in bold choices. She believed in decisiveness. She believed that hesitation was just cowardice wearing polite clothes. Apologies, in her view, were for people who lacked conviction or foresight, and she had plenty of both. If something went badly, it wasn't because she'd made a mistake. It was because the circumstances had failed to rise to her level. David Mitchell understood this about his wife early on. He simply didn't think it was a problem. He had married her because she was certain. Certain people, David believed, made the world easier to navigate. They picked restaurants without debate. They chose lanes in traffic without wavering. They ordered confidently and never said, "Actually, can I change that?" There was a comfort in that kind of certainty, even if it occasionally ran over you on the way to being right. Sarah called it confidence. David called it efficiency. Neither felt the need to argue about it. They met in their late 30s, both already formed adults, which Sarah liked to point out whenever someone used the phrase young love. There was nothing young about them. They had careers, credit scores, opinions that had survived at least one recession. Sarah admired David's steadiness when they first started dating. He showed up when he said he would. He listened. He didn't try to impress her with unnecessary flourishes. At the time, she thought this was depth. David, for his part, admired Sarah's intensity. She spoke like someone used to being listened to. She had a way of finishing sentences that made them sound definitive, as if punctuation were optional when conviction was strong enough. He liked that she seemed to know where she was going, even if she didn't always explain why. Their marriage, when it happened, was efficient. The wedding was tasteful. The guest list controlled. The speeches short. Sarah vetoed anything that felt sentimental. David deferred, as he often did, because nothing she vetoed mattered much to him. Marriage to David was not a performance. It was a structure. You built it correctly and then lived inside it. And for a while it worked beautifully. Bills were paid early. Calendars synced. Groceries appeared in the refrigerator without drama. Arguments, when they happened, ended quickly, not because Sarah compromised, but because David didn't escalate. He had learned that resolution mattered more than victory. Sarah, interpreting his de-escalation as agreement, won by default. This arrangement suited them both. To outsiders, they were enviable. At family dinners, David's reliability was often praised in tones usually reserved for durable kitchen appliances. "You're so lucky," Sarah's aunt once said, cutting into her chicken. "David is just so dependable." Sarah smiled the way one smiles when receiving a compliment meant for someone else that somehow reflects well on you anyway. "Yes," she said. "He's very consistent." David nodded politely, unaware that consistent was not the word Sarah would have chosen if she were being generous. At another dinner, David's mother, Patricia, remarked on how calm he always was. "He never gets flustered," she said, "even as a boy." "That's true," Sarah said, leaning back slightly. "Although sometimes calm is just a lack of imagination." David glanced at her, not offended. He assumed this was affectionate. It was in its way. Sarah liked to win arguments even when there was nothing at stake. She corrected trivial facts. She rephrased David's stories mid-sentence. She adjusted restaurant orders the moment the waiter walked away, citing clarity. "You said medium," she once reminded David. But what you meant was medium rare. There's a difference. David agreed, though he hadn't meant medium rare. Their marriage had no explosions, no betrayals, no obvious fractures, which to Sarah was precisely the problem. She began to notice it in the quiet moments. Tuesday afternoons when the house hummed along without requiring input. Weeknights that ended exactly as they began. Stability, she realized, was relentless. It never surprised you. It never challenged you. It simply continued. David saw continuity. Sarah saw stagnation. She didn't articulate this immediately. Sarah liked to understand a problem fully before naming it, preferably in a way that sounded insightful. When she finally did speak, it was during a perfectly ordinary evening over a perfectly adequate dinner. "Do you ever feel," she said casually, "like we're just maintaining?" David looked up from his plate. "Maintaining what?" "Us," she said. "This." He considered the question seriously. "I think that's kind of the point." Sarah smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That's exactly what I mean." To David, marriage was something you protected from entropy. To Sarah, it was something that should evolve, or else admit it had stopped deserving her attention. She did not feel neglected. That would have implied need. She felt understimulated. And that, to Sarah Mitchell, was unforgivable. From the outside, nothing changed. The routines continued. The dinners happened. The laughter appeared on schedule. But inside Sarah, a quiet verdict had already been delivered. She had chosen well once. That didn't mean she had to stop choosing, and she had never been wrong before. Stability is a mood killer. Sarah Mitchell didn't wake up one morning and decide her marriage was failing. That would have implied drama, conflict, or at least a triggering event. What she experienced instead was far more offensive. Nothing happened. The mornings arrived on time. The coffee tasted the same. David left for work, returned when expected, asked how her day was, listened to the answer, and responded appropriately. The house functioned. The relationship functioned, and slowly, relentlessly, Sarah began to experience this competence as a personal slight. She started narrating her dissatisfaction the way some people narrate growth. Calmly, thoughtfully, as if she were explaining a concept to someone less evolved. "I just feel like something's missing," she said one night, staring at the living room wall as if it might confess. David paused the television. "Missing how?" "Not how," Sarah corrected. "Just missing." David nodded. He had learned that when Sarah spoke this way, precision mattered. "Okay, what do you think it is?" She sighed, already irritated. "That's the problem. I shouldn't have to explain it." David accepted this, which only made it worse. He began offering solutions because solutions were how he understood concern. He suggested a long weekend somewhere warmer. He mentioned couples counseling, not urgently, just as an option. He proposed rearranging their schedules so they'd have more time together during the week. Each suggestion landed like an insult. "You're not listening," Sarah said after he mentioned therapy. "I am," David replied carefully. "I just thought." "No," she said. "You're trying to fix it." David frowned. "Isn't that good?" She looked at him the way one looks at someone who has answered a philosophical question with a spreadsheet. "Fixing implies it's broken," she said. "This is deeper than that." David nodded again. He took mental notes. He adjusted his behavior. He became more present, more attentive, more accommodating. Sarah noticed immediately and resented him for it. The more reasonable he became, the more trapped she felt. Reason, she was discovering, was claustrophobic. It left no room for grand dissatisfaction. No justification for leaving something that worked. She began reframing boredom as enlightenment. "It's not that you're doing anything wrong," she told him one afternoon, which David knew meant he was absolutely doing something wrong. "I've just grown." David blinked. "Grown past what?" She gestured vaguely. "This." That night, David fixed the kitchen sink. It had been leaking for months. A slow, polite drip that hadn't inconvenienced anyone enough to demand urgency. David replaced a washer, tightened a fitting, and wiped the cabinet clean. He emerged triumphant, holding the wrench like evidence. "Sink's good," he said. Sarah looked up from her phone. Great. There was a pause. David lingered, waiting for something else to be acknowledged. When nothing came, he tried again. I was thinking about what you said earlier, he began. About feeling stuck. She sighed. David, I don't need plumbing metaphors. I wasn't. You always do this, she said. You fix the obvious thing and act like that solves the underlying issue. He looked genuinely confused. The sink was leaking. I'm talking about us, she said, emphasizing the word like it had capital letters. David set the wrench down slowly. Okay. Help me understand. Sarah closed her eyes. She counted to 3. Patience, she reminded herself, was a skill she possessed. It's like there's an emotional leak, she said. And instead of addressing that, you're tightening bolts. David nodded, absorbing this. He didn't point out that emotional leaks were harder to locate or that she hadn't specified where the problem was. He simply listened. Later that week, Sarah complained to her sister, Jennifer, over lunch. I just feel like I'm suffocating, Sarah said, stirring her drink aggressively. Everything is so fine. Jennifer chewed thoughtfully. So what did David do? Sarah frowned. What do you mean? I mean, Jennifer said carefully. What's the issue? Did he lie? Ignore you? Do something? No, Sarah said. That's not the point. Jennifer waited. He's just there, Sarah continued. Always reasonable. Always willing. It's exhausting. Jennifer blinked. So, he didn't do anything wrong. Sarah's jaw tightened. Why does everyone keep asking it like that? I'm just trying to understand, Jennifer said. Because it kind of sounds like you're mad at him for being stable. Sarah laughed sharply. Stability is a mood killer. Jennifer didn't laugh back. At home, David upgraded the router. The internet had been spotty, dropping calls and buffering at inconvenient moments. He researched models, compared reviews, and installed the new one seamlessly. The connection improved immediately. Wi-Fi's faster now, he told Sarah, hopeful. She looked up briefly. That's not what I need. He nodded again. From the outside, David appeared to be doing everything right. From Sarah's perspective, that was the problem. His competence removed all friction. And without friction, there was no spark, no drama, no proof that she was still choosing something instead of merely inhabiting it. She began to see her restlessness not as dissatisfaction, but as evidence of depth. Other people settled. She evolved. Other people accepted maintenance. She required transformation. David, sensing her distance, leaned in harder. He listened more carefully. He responded more gently. He tried to meet her where she was. Sarah felt cornered by kindness. Reason had become a cage, and David was unknowingly reinforcing the bars. By the time she said out loud, I think we're just roommates now, the verdict had already been reached. Not because anything had gone wrong, but because nothing had. Someone who finally gets it. Sarah Mitchell didn't join the online community because she was unhappy. She joined because she was curious. That distinction mattered to her. Curiosity implied intelligence. Unhappiness implied need. Sarah had never needed anything she couldn't already articulate. The forum described itself as a space for personal expansion, which she found refreshingly vague. Promised growth without requiring confession, insight without accountability. Perfect. She filled out her profile carefully, not dishonestly, just selectively. Interests instead of obligations, ambitions instead of routines. She did not mention marriage. Marriage, she believed, was contextual. The messages began almost immediately. Most were forgettable men mistaking agreement for depth. Compliments that tried too hard. Sarah skimmed them with professional detachment. And then there was Marcus. He claimed to be 33. He wrote incomplete sentences. He asked questions and waited for answers. When Sarah explained how stability had begun to feel limiting, he didn't counter or qualify. He validated. That makes sense, he wrote. Most people never outgrow the structures they were handed. Sarah paused, reread the sentence, and smiled. Marcus never disagreed with her, not once. When she framed boredom as evolution, he called it awakening. When she described her marriage as something she had built but no longer lived inside, he called it bravery. He spoke the language of self-realization fluently, like someone who had memorized all the right affirmations and knew exactly when to deploy them. David noticed the late nights first. Sarah had always been efficient with her time. She slept predictably. She hated mornings that felt compromised by poor rest. So when she started staying up later, phone glowing softly against the sheets, David assumed work stress. "Everything okay?" he asked one night, already half asleep. "Just thinking," Sarah replied, not looking up. David nodded. Thinking made sense. Sarah did a lot of it. The messages escalated the way all things do when no one resists them. Casual check-ins turned into long exchanges. Long exchanges turned into daily rituals. Sarah began looking forward to the moments when her phone vibrated. Not because she needed the attention, but because it arrived already agreeing with her. Marcus had a talent for finishing her thoughts. "You're not unhappy," he typed once. "You're misaligned." Sarah felt seen. She began correcting David more often. Not aggressively, just reflexively. Words mattered after all. "I didn't say frustrated," she told him over dinner one night. "I said understimulated. There's a difference." David nodded, chewing. "Okay." She sent Marcus a message immediately after. "You're so articulate," she wrote. "It's rare." Marcus responded within seconds. "That's because I actually listen." Sarah smiled to herself. Passwords appeared. Not announced, just implemented. Her phone rotated away from David's line of sight during conversations. When she laughed, it was softer, more private. David noticed vaguely but filed it under stress. Sarah was intense when she was thinking. This, he assumed, was more thinking. At a family dinner, Sarah interrupted David mid-story to clarify a detail that didn't matter. "What he means," she said smoothly, "is that the project shifted, not failed." David glanced at her, surprised. He hadn't said failed. Later that night, she messaged Marcus. "Sometimes I feel like I'm editing my own life." "That's because you're ready to write a new draft," Marcus replied. She didn't think of it as cheating. Cheating implied deceit. This felt like accuracy, like someone had finally adjusted the focus and brought her into clarity. She didn't hide it carefully because she didn't believe she was doing anything wrong. From Marcus's perspective, everything was proceeding efficiently. He mirrored her language. He echoed her dissatisfaction back with amplification. He avoided specifics about his own life, offering just enough vulnerability to appear authentic. Age, he knew, was flexible online. Identity even more so. What mattered was resonance. And Sarah resonated beautifully. From David's perspective, his wife seemed distracted, but not distant. Engaged, but elsewhere. He attributed it to the phase she was clearly going through, a reassessment, perhaps. People reassessed. That was normal. He made a note to suggest a weekend away. From the outside, nothing looked alarming. From the inside, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not desire, validation. She was no longer explaining herself to someone who misunderstood the premise. She was being received correctly. And once someone experiences that, it becomes very hard to tolerate anything else. The trap did not snap shut. It didn't need to. Sarah walked into it willingly, convinced it had been designed just for her. Compassion with a wire transfer. Marcus did not introduce his hardship all at once. That would have been inelegant. He told it the way people tell truths they've practiced, layer by layer. Each one designed to earn the next. First came the childhood. It was, according to Marcus, relentlessly unfair, not dramatic in the way people expect suffering to be, but grinding, humiliating, and structural. He was the older child, which meant he was expected to understand things early and forgive them often. His younger brother, he explained, had been the golden one, the one teachers praised, the one relatives defended, the one his parents described as sensitive whenever consequences came due. Marcus was described as difficult. He told Sarah how his parents openly compared them, how his brother's mistakes were framed as phases, while Marcus's were treated as character flaws. If his brother failed a test, it was pressure. If Marcus failed, it was laziness. If his brother acted out, it was stress. If Marcus did, it was disrespect. Sarah listened with the attentiveness she usually reserved for TED Talks. She nodded at the right moments. This story made sense to her. She had always believed families chose favorites, and she had always known she would never be one of them. Marcus described the incident the way one describes a formative wound without naming it as such. He was 19, he said, when his parents decided he needed perspective. They drove him nearly 300 miles away under the guise of visiting relatives. Halfway through the trip, they pulled over at a gas station, told him to get out, handed him a small amount of cash in a backpack, said he needed to learn independence. Then they left. No yelling, no tears, just a quiet, irreversible decision. He never went back. He told her how he slept in his car at first, how he worked jobs that didn't ask questions, how he learned early that people responded better to confidence than explanations, that asking for help only confirmed what others already suspected about you. Sarah admired this immensely. Then came the rise. Marcus spoke about discipline the way people do when they wanted to sound like destiny. He talked about reading obsessively. Marcus never claimed he got rich quickly. That, he said, was for people who wanted attention. He told Sarah he built his money the boring way, correctly. After leaving home, he worked a series of low-level jobs that taught him how systems actually functioned. Warehouses, logistics, contract administration. He learned where value leaked and where it pooled. He noticed who got paid regardless of performance and who carried risk without reward. Most people, he explained, never bothered to look. He did. He said he started small, flipping distressed assets no one else wanted to touch. Storage units, equipment leases, defaulted contracts bought for cents on the dollar. He described it as buying inefficiency. You didn't need luck, just patience and an understanding of leverage. I never chased trends, he wrote. I chased margins. Sarah loved that sentence. Marcus explained how he avoided flashy spending. No cars, no watches, no visible upgrades. Wealth, he said, was quieter than people thought. It moved through LLCs and shell entities. It hid behind compliance and paperwork. People who showed their money lost it. He didn't. He talked about credit as a tool, not a crutch. How he used other people's capital intelligently. How he maintained excellent payment histories. How he let institutions fund his growth while he retained control. The system rewards predictability, he told her. Once you understand that, it's just math. Sarah nodded at her screen, impressed. This was language she respected, rational, strategic, superior. When she asked what industry he'd been in, he gave answers that sounded specific without being checkable. Asset recovery, private capital placement, logistics-adjacent consulting. When she pressed gently, he smiled it off. It's boring, he wrote. And honestly, the people who ask too many questions are usually the ones who don't understand it. She agreed immediately. He said he reached 7 figures before 45. Not because he chased scale, but because he refused to panic. He exited at the right times. He diversified. He didn't marry emotion to assets. Flashy wealth embarrassed him. He said it attracted the wrong kind of attention. Sarah approved. Flashy things embarrassed her too. Earned wealth validated her worldview. The fall arrived last, as if reluctantly. A rare medical condition. Sudden, devastating. The kind of thing insurance always lagged behind. Treatments existed, but they were experimental. Specialists were brilliant but itinerant, always relocating just ahead of coverage approvals. The system, Marcus explained gently, had failed him. Sarah believed him instantly. Of course it had. Systems always failed people like Marcus. People who worked hard, who refused to ask for help, who had been punished early for being less palatable than their siblings. She told him so carefully, decisively, as if naming a truth he had been waiting to hear his whole life. You survived things that would have broken most people, she wrote. That doesn't just disappear because circumstances change. Marcus thanked her. Not effusively, just enough. He did not ask for money. I'm not broke, he told her. I'm just temporarily inaccessible. That phrasing mattered to Sarah more than anything else. If he had asked, it would have cheapened the exchange, made it transactional. Instead, he allowed her to see the gap and step into it herself. That, she believed, was the mark of dignity. By the time she offered help, she felt almost relieved. This wasn't recklessness. It was alignment, a correction, a chance to invest in someone whose story mirrored everything she believed about unfairness, resilience, and the quiet superiority of those who endured without complaint. And if it cost money, well, money was replaceable. Being right was not. Sarah hated systems that failed the deserving. "I don't like to talk about it," Marcus wrote. "I hate asking for help." She read the sentence twice, nodded once, and replied with certainty. "You're not asking," she typed. "I'm offering." Marcus did not argue. The first transfer was small, a few thousand, framed as temporary. Sarah didn't even think of it as money leaving. She thought of it as momentum. She explained it to herself the way she explained everything else, cleanly, logically. Compassion, after all, was an investment. The second transfer followed quickly, then another. Each one justified by urgency, timing, the impossibility of waiting. Specialists moved, windows closed, lives were at stake. Marcus never pressed. He simply updated her carefully, always sounding reluctant to burden her with reality. Sarah felt chosen. At a family brunch, her sister Jennifer mentioned rising healthcare costs in passing. "It's criminal," Jennifer said, sipping coffee. "How people get ruined just trying to survive." Sarah leaned back, warmed by relevance. "That's why emotional ROI matters," she said. Jennifer blinked. "Emotional what?" "Return on investment," Sarah explained patiently. "If you're going to put energy or resources into someone, it should align with your values." Jennifer frowned. "Are you investing in someone?" Sarah smiled. "I'm supporting growth." Jennifer nodded slowly, the way one nods when the alternative is a follow-up question they don't want the answer to. At home, David noticed the accounts. Not dramatically, just numbers that didn't align with expectation. A dip where there shouldn't have been one. A transfer that looked purposeful but unexplained. He mentioned it once, casually over dinner. "Hey," he said, "did we move money recently?" Sarah didn't look up from her plate. "Yes." "Oh," David said. "For what?" "Something important," she replied, tone smooth, confident. "I'll explain later." David accepted this. Sarah explained things thoroughly when they mattered. He trusted her clarity. He always had. The transfers grew bolder. 5 figures, then more. Sarah didn't flinch. Each payment felt like alignment snapping into place. This was what decisiveness looked like in action. This was what commitment meant when it wasn't diluted by hesitation. She stopped thinking of the money as theirs. That implied mutuality. This was hers being put to meaningful use. Shared accounts, she reasoned, were an administrative convenience, not a moral boundary. Marcus sent updates, treatment schedules, test results, vague photos of sterile-looking rooms. Sarah didn't ask for documentation. That would have implied doubt, and doubt was for people without conviction. Late at night, while David slept, she wired money and felt something close to relief. Not guilt, not fear, clarity. From Marcus's perspective, the arrangement was proceeding perfectly. He used the language she preferred. Growth, alignment, resilience. He never said need. He said timing. He never said help. He said opportunity. Creditors were satisfied. Collections quieted. The pressure eased. From David's perspective, the house continued to function. Sarah seemed energized, focused, almost lighter. He assumed the financial movement was related to whatever internal restructuring she was clearly undergoing. People spent money on transitions. That was normal. From the outside, nothing looked alarming. Inside Sarah, something had settled. Every dollar sent was proof. Not just that Marcus mattered, but that she was right. Right to feel bored. Right to seek more. Right to act decisively instead of lingering in maintenance. By the time the total crossed $87,000, she no longer counted. She had invested too much to question the premise. And questioning the premise, Sarah Mitchell knew, was the first step toward admitting a mistake. She had never been wrong before. The virus. The laptop didn't crash dramatically. It slowed down first. Tabs lagged. A pop-up appeared asking permission to install something neither of them remembered downloading. The fan began to whine softly, like it was embarrassed to be working that hard. David noticed because David noticed systems misbehaving. "Sarah," he said from the kitchen table, already opening the laptop. "Did you click anything weird?" "No," Sarah replied from the couch without looking up. "If I did, it wouldn't be weird." David accepted this and got to work. He ran a scan, disabled a browser extension, cleared the cache. The process was soothing in the way familiar problems often are. There was comfort in knowing that most things, given enough patience, revealed what was wrong with them. While the scan ran, a chat window popped up on the screen. It was still open. David didn't freeze. He didn't gasp. He didn't feel a surge of dread. He simply registered the information the way one registers an unexpected but explainable error message. He read. The tone was unmistakable, intimate, without being explicit, affirming, the kind of language people use when they believe they are being understood correctly. He scrolled slowly, methodically, the way he did when reviewing code. Then he saw the attachments, payment confirmations, wire transfers, screenshots, invoices labeled with medical terminology that looked impressive until you read them twice and realized they said very little. Amounts stacked neatly on the right-hand side of the screen, climbing into numbers that made his stomach tighten, not with panic, but with recognition. "Oh," David said quietly. He bookmarked the page, not for evidence, just so he could come back to it later if needed. The scan finished, malware removed, performance restored. David leaned back in the chair and exhaled through his nose. He felt oddly calm, as if something that had been hovering just out of focus had finally snapped into clarity. From the other room, Sarah spoke without looking up. "Did you fix it?" "Yes," David said. "Great," she replied. "I hate when technology wastes my time." David closed the laptop. He did not confront her. He did not ask who Marcus was or why his medical bills resembled debt consolidation schedules. He did not demand explanations. He did not raise his voice or imagine shouting scenes that would never happen because David understood something important almost immediately. Sarah would not admit she was wrong. If he confronted her, she would not confess. She would justify. She would reframe. She would escalate. Any challenge would only strengthen her resolve. The money already sent would become proof she was right. Any attempt to stop her would be interpreted as control. This was not a misunderstanding. It was a completed decision. So David did what he always did when a system proved irreparably flawed. He stopped feeding it. That evening, Sarah talked animatedly about something she'd read online, some article about people outgrowing relationships that no longer aligned with their values. David listened. He nodded at the appropriate moments. He asked one clarifying question and then let it go. Later, while Sarah showered, David opened their banking app. He didn't move anything yet. He just looked. Accounts, balances, patterns. He noticed how transfers clustered around certain days, how amounts increased gradually like someone testing the limits of resistance. He closed the app and set the phone down. The next day, he paid off a joint credit card in full, not as a gesture, as insulation. A week later, he redirected his paycheck into a separate account he'd opened quietly years ago for reasons he'd never needed to articulate until now. He updated passwords, reviewed automatic payments, simplified exposure. At dinner, Sarah noticed none of this. She was distracted, energized. Her phone buzzed intermittently, and each time it did, her posture changed just enough for David to see it. "You seem lighter," he said once, neutrally. "I am," Sarah replied. "I'm finally being honest with myself." David nodded. Honesty, he was learning, was a flexible concept. One evening, as he was updating antivirus definitions, Sarah leaned over his shoulder. "You always know how to fix these things," she said, not unkindly. David smiled faintly. "Most problems announce themselves." She laughed. "If only people did." David thought of the bookmarked page, the invoices, the numbers. People did announce themselves, he realized, just not always in the way you expected. The laptop hummed quietly, healthy again. The marriage, David understood, was not. But there was no urgency. No emergency response required. This wasn't a fire. It was structural rot. And structural issues, David knew, were best handled calmly, with preparation and no unnecessary movement. Reasonable questions. David Mitchell did not secure the finances in a single dramatic motion. He did it the way he did everything else. Incrementally, quietly, without announcing intention. He paid off shared liabilities, closed a dormant credit line, updated passwords that had not been changed in years. He redirected income streams the way one redirects water before a freeze. Nothing flashy, just preventative. From the outside, nothing changed. From the inside, the system was being prepared for separation. Sarah noticed none of it. She was occupied with alignment, with timing, with the belief that life, when chosen decisively, reorganized itself around the chooser. The question came on a Thursday. It was not strategic. David hadn't rehearsed it. It emerged naturally, the way reasonable questions often do, unaware of the chaos they're about to trigger. They were standing in the kitchen. Sarah was scrolling through her phone. David was rinsing a mug. "Hey," he said casually, "do you know why the checking account is short this month?" That was it. No accusation, no tone shift, no loaded phrasing. Just a question that assumed there was an answer. Sarah looked up too quickly. "What?" she said. "The balance," David repeated. "It's lower than I expected." "Oh," Sarah said, laughing immediately. Too immediately. That. She waved her hand dismissively, as if the numbers had inconvenienced her. "I moved some things around." David nodded. "Okay. For what?" Sarah turned back to her phone. "Stuff." "Like what?" She sighed loudly now. "David, why are you suddenly tracking pennies?" He set the mug down. "I'm not. I just noticed." "Well, you don't need to," she said. "I've got it handled." Handled. The word landed heavier than she intended. She felt it immediately and tried to smooth it over. "I mean, it's temporary," she added quickly. "You know how transitions work." David waited. She didn't like waiting. Waiting implied doubt. "You're always so focused on numbers," she said, pivoting. "Sometimes I wish you cared more about what those numbers mean." "I do," David said evenly. "That's why I asked." Sarah laughed again, sharper this time. "Wow. Okay. This is really not the energy I need right now." "What energy?" David asked. "This," she said, gesturing vaguely between them. "Interrogative." "I'm not interrogating," he said. "I'm asking." "Well, stop," she snapped. Then softer. "Please." Silence stretched. Not long. Just enough for Sarah's thoughts to race ahead of her mouth. She over-explained next. Too many words, abstract concepts, vague assurances, alignment, timing, things being in motion, nothing concrete, everything confident. David listened. He nodded once. "Okay," he said. "Thanks for explaining." That was the moment Sarah panicked. Not because she felt cornered, but because she hadn't convinced him. She was used to persuasion landing cleanly. This time it floated untethered, unacknowledged. That night, while David slept, Sarah made her decision. Not to confess, not to negotiate, not to explain, to act. She transferred $62,000 in 2 movements. Not one. One felt impulsive. 2 felt intentional. She packed a bag quickly, efficiently. Clothes that suggested continuity, not escape. She left a note on the counter. "I'm choosing myself. I need space to become who I'm meant to be." She did not apologize. From her perspective, this was not running away. It was commitment. When David woke up and read the note, he did not sit down. He did not reread it. He simply folded it once and placed it in a drawer with documents that no longer required daily attention. Adults are allowed to leave. The police station smelled like disinfectant and old coffee, clean but tired. David Mitchell sat in a plastic chair bolted to the floor, hands folded loosely in his lap, posture relaxed in a way that suggested he had not come to demand anything. He had come to report facts. Facts, he knew, were easier to process than feelings. Across the desk, Detective Thomas Rivera skimmed the intake form with the practiced speed of someone who already knew how this would end. "So," Rivera said, not unkindly, "your wife left voluntarily." "Yes," David replied. "And she took money." "Yes." Rivera nodded. He tapped the paper once with his pen. A small ritual gesture that signaled transition rather than concern. "That part's civil," he said. "The money, I assumed," David said. Rivera looked up briefly, mildly surprised by the lack of protest. Most people argued that point loudly. "She leave a note?" Rivera asked. "Yes." "What did it say?" David considered for half a second. "That she was choosing herself." Rivera exhaled through his nose. Not a laugh, not quite a sigh. "Recognition." "Yeah," he said. "We see that a lot." He typed something into the computer. The keyboard clicks sounded louder than necessary in the quiet room. "Here's the thing," Rivera continued. "She's an adult. There's no indication of coercion, no threats, no signs of harm. Adults are allowed to leave." David nodded. "I understand. Even if they make bad decisions," Rivera added, almost apologetically. David did not respond. He didn't need the clarification. Rivera shifted in his chair, glanced at the screen, then back at David. "Do you want us to try to locate her?" The word try hung in the air between them. It was a generous word, flexible. It meant paperwork. Maybe a phone call, possibly a note in a system that did not alarm easily. David thought of Sarah's face when she believed she was right. The way her certainty filled rooms, how any challenge became proof that she was being misunderstood. "No," he said calmly. "Just document it." Rivera nodded, already clicking boxes. "All right, we'll log the abandonment. Theft gets noted. But like I said, that's civil. You want to talk to a lawyer about that part." "Thank you," David said. Rivera printed a form and slid it across the desk. "Case numbers on the top. Don't lose it. You probably won't need it, but still." David took the paper, folded it neatly, and stood. "That's it?" he asked. Rivera smiled faintly. "That's it." Outside, the sun was higher than David expected. The day had continued without waiting for permission. From the system's perspective, nothing remarkable had happened. A woman left. A man reported it. The file existed now. Thin, unimpressive. No urgency required. From Sarah's perspective, wherever she was, this absence would eventually become evidence of strength, proof that she had acted decisively without interference. From David's perspective, the system had behaved exactly as designed. It respected consent. It avoided drama. It declined to chase adults who made choices, even destructive ones. Closure, it turned out, was administrative. David walked to his car, placed the folded paper in the glove compartment, and started the engine. He did not feel relief. He did not feel anger. He felt something quieter and more durable. Completion. The case would go dormant. The file would remain. The system would stop where consent ended. So would he. The door opens. Sarah Mitchell stood in the hallway outside apartment 5D and checked the address again, even though she already knew it by heart. She had memorized it the way people memorize beginnings, repeatedly with optimism. She had imagined this moment dozens of times. The door opening, recognition flickering across a younger man's face. Relief, maybe awe, a starting line. She knocked. There was movement inside. Slow, heavy. Something scraped along the floor before the door opened halfway. The man who stood there was not 33. He was 54 at least. Thick through the middle, his stomach pushing forward as if it had arrived before the rest of him. His t-shirt clung damply to his back. His arms were covered in tattoos that had not aged well, inks that had once meant something and now simply occupied skin. His face looked tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. Not sick, worn. He blinked at her. "Sarah," he said, smiling. "You made it." The fantasy ended right there. Not gradually, not gently. It collapsed with the efficiency of something that had never been load-bearing to begin with. Behind him, the apartment revealed itself without ceremony. The air was stale, heavy with old grease and something sour. Pizza boxes were stacked like evidence along one wall. Unopened mail spilled from a cracked side table. A couch sagged permanently in the middle, its cushions stained in ways that suggested repetition rather than accident. There were no medical devices, no sterile surfaces, no sign of a life paused by illness. Only debt. Sarah did not scream. She did not gasp or step back. She did not say, "This isn't you." She stood very still, her mind moving faster than her body. "Oh," she said. Marcus stepped aside to let her in, already talking. "Sorry about the mess. It's been a rough few weeks." She crossed the threshold automatically. Muscle memory, commitment to momentum. The door closed behind her. Up close, the details became unavoidable. The tattoos weren't artistic. They were accumulative. The kind you got because time passed and decisions felt important in the moment. His face held none of the careful lighting from his photos. No angles, no discipline, just gravity. "You look different," Sarah said. Marcus laughed too quickly. "Pictures lie." "No," she said calmly. "People do." The silence that followed was not dramatic. It was administrative. Marcus scratched the back of his neck. "Look, I should explain." "Before you do," Sarah said, holding up a hand. "How old are you?" He hesitated. A beat too long. 54, he said. Sarah nodded. Not an acceptance. An acknowledgement. "And the treatments?" she asked. Marcus gestured vaguely around the room. "That's complicated." She walked past him, scanning the apartment like an auditor. Overdue notices, collection letters, a laptop open to a banking portal that did not show medical billing. Credit cards laid out like tools. "Those weren't specialists," she said. "They were creditors." Marcus sighed. "It's not that simple." "It is," Sarah replied. The speed of her recalculation was impressive. Pride did not allow for collapse. Pride demanded reorientation. She thought of the money, of the certainty she'd invested in this story, of the alternative going back, explaining, admitting. That option vanished instantly. "You could have told me," she said. "You didn't ask," Marcus replied. That was technically true, and they both knew it. Sarah sat down on the edge of the couch, careful not to touch the stain. She did not feel fear yet. Fear required vulnerability. What she felt was irritation, at inefficiency, at misrepresentation, at the sloppiness of it all. "You said you didn't want help," she said. "I don't," Marcus said. "I wanted understanding." Sarah laughed once. Soft, sharp. "You wanted money." Marcus didn't deny it. "And you wanted meaning." They stared at each other. From Marcus's perspective, this was salvageable. She had come this far. People who left their lives rarely turned around quickly. Momentum was a form of leverage. From Sarah's perspective, the damage was already done. But damage could be managed. Leaving now would mean confession. Staying meant control over the narrative. She could still make this make sense. She stood. "I need to use the bathroom," she said. "Down the hall," Marcus replied. She walked away without hesitation. Locked the door behind her. Looked at herself in the mirror. Still composed. Still recognizable. This was not the beginning she'd planned. But it was still a beginning. And Sarah Mitchell did not walk away from choices she had already made. When she came back out, she picked up her bag and set it by the door. "I'll stay," she said. Marcus smiled, relief blooming too fast. The fantasy was dead. But the lie was still very much alive. "I don't run from my choices." The door remained unlocked. That fact mattered. Sarah noticed it immediately the next morning. She noticed everything that could be framed as evidence of autonomy. The deadbolt sat untouched. The chain hung slack. The hallway outside was as accessible as it had been the night before. She did not test it. She made coffee instead. Burnt, overbrewed, poured into a mug that advertised a company that no longer existed. She drank it standing up, eyes scanning the apartment with the cool detachment of someone inventorying a bad investment rather than regretting it. From a purely logistical standpoint, leaving was simple. She had shoes. She had identification. She had enough cash left to buy a bus ticket, a hotel room, a story. Marcus had not hidden her phone. He had not blocked the door. He had not raised his voice or issued threats. This was important. Sarah catalogued it carefully. People who were trapped, she believed, looked different. They were frantic, tearful, reactive. She was none of those things. She was calm, analytical, annoyed, which meant, by her own definition, she was still in control. Marcus watched her from the kitchen doorway, trying not to look like he was watching. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm thinking," Sarah replied. He nodded. Thinking, he had learned, was not something to interrupt. She turned to him slowly. "I want to be clear about something." "Sure," he said quickly. "I'm not staying because I have nowhere else to go." Marcus held his hands up slightly, palms open. "I wouldn't assume that." "Good," Sarah said. "Because that would be insulting." She walked past him, picked up her bag, then set it back down deliberately where he could see it. A visual cue, a declaration. "I'm staying because I don't abandon my decisions the moment they become uncomfortable." Marcus exhaled, relief slipping through before he could stop it. "That says a lot about you." "It does," Sarah agreed. From her perspective, this was not stubbornness. It was consistency. She had chosen this path with intention. Walking away now would retroactively turn intention into error, and error into something far more dangerous. Humiliation. Going back meant explanations. Explanations to David, whose calm would become unbearable. To Jennifer, whose quiet concern would feel like judgment. To herself, which was the worst of all. Staying required endurance. Leaving required surrender. Sarah had never surrendered anything in her life. She reframed quickly. This was temporary, strategic, a recalibration phase. People reinvented themselves all the time, and reinvention was never comfortable. That didn't make it wrong. If I endure long enough, she told herself, the narrative will stabilize. Marcus busied himself tidying a surface that didn't improve with effort. He understood momentum. People rarely reversed it once they committed. Especially people like Sarah who wore certainty like armor. "You don't have to decide anything right now," he said, attempting casualness. "I already have," Sarah replied. They settled into an uneasy rhythm that felt to Sarah like progress. She asked practical questions about bills, about schedules, about expectations. Marcus answered them readily, relieved by the shift from revelation to logistics. This, she believed, was where competence reclaimed ground. Later that afternoon, Marcus mentioned money. Not directly, just in passing. "Things are tight," he said. "Until some stuff clears." Sarah nodded. "I assumed." She did not ask what stuff meant. She had learned that ambiguity was easier to manage than disappointment. "I'll contribute," she said. "Temporarily." Marcus smiled. "I knew you'd understand." Of course she did. Understanding was her strength. That night, lying awake on the couch that smelled faintly of old takeout and resignation, Sarah ran through the alternative scenarios one last time. Calling David, hearing silence on the other end, or worse, measured concern, the kind that made her feel foolish without saying so. Calling Jennifer, explaining, watching the image of herself fracture in real time. None of those outcomes were survivable. This one was. She turned onto her side, careful not to touch the stain, and closed her eyes. From the outside, it would look like she had disappeared. From the inside, Sarah believed she was holding the line. She wasn't trapped. She was staying. And in her mind, that distinction made all the difference. Efficiency. Control did not arrive loudly. It did not kick down doors or raise its voice. It showed up the way most systems do, wearing the language of improvement, carrying a clipboard no one had asked for, and insisting it was only temporary. Marcus introduced the first adjustment over breakfast. Sarah was scrolling through her phone, rereading messages that no longer existed, refreshing feeds that no longer fed her. Marcus watched for a moment, then spoke with what he clearly believed was tact. "You ever think about how distracting that thing is?" he said. Sarah didn't look up. "Phones are tools." "Exactly," Marcus said. And tools work best when they're used intentionally. She raised an eyebrow. Go on. Well, he continued, while you're getting settled, it might help to reduce noise, just for a bit. You can use mine if you need to. He held out his hand. The request was phrased carefully, not as a demand, as an optimization. Sarah hesitated for half a second, long enough to register the optics, not the danger, then placed her phone in his palm. This is temporary, she said. Of course, Marcus replied. Everything transitional is. That afternoon they discussed money. Not dramatically, practically. Marcus spread out papers on the table, bills, notices, balances that looked busy enough to be important. He spoke calmly, with the tone of someone who had once given presentations. I'm just not great with day-to-day budgeting, he said. Big picture? Fine. Details? Not my strength. Sarah nodded. She understood delegating weaknesses. I can help, she offered. Marcus smiled sympathetically. Honestly, you're even worse. She laughed. Excuse me? You're visionary, he said. That's not an insult. But you're not built for micro-decisions. Neither am I really. What we need is structure. Structure appealed to her. Structure implied purpose. So, Marcus continued, we centralize. One account, one plan, clean inputs, clean outputs. What about my accounts? Sarah asked. Messy, Marcus said gently. Too many variables. We simplify. She considered this. Simplification was not surrender. It was strategy. Fine, she said. For now. That was how it always happened. For now. The diner job came next. Marcus framed it as reintegration. Routine helps, he said. You don't want to feel disconnected from momentum. Sarah agreed. She did not see the irony. The diner paid in cash some nights, prepaid cards on others. No direct deposit, no benefits. It felt temporary, which made it tolerable. Each evening, she placed the day's earnings on the table. Here, she'd say, today's contribution. Marcus would nod, scoop it up and add it to a growing stack. Team effort, he'd say. Sarah liked that phrasing. She told herself this was adulthood stripped of sentimentality. No illusions, no romance about independence, just shared survival optimized. When she reached for her phone and remembered she didn't have it, she felt a flicker of irritation, not fear. I'll need it back eventually, she said once. Of course, Marcus replied. Once things stabilize. Stability. That word again. Weeks passed. Sarah's world narrowed. Not abruptly, but efficiently. Work, commute, apartment, sleep. She stopped thinking about what she wasn't doing because thinking required bandwidth and bandwidth was now allocated elsewhere. From Marcus's perspective, the system was elegant, minimal resistance, clear incentives. Sarah believed she was choosing order over chaos, which meant she defended it instinctively. From Sarah's perspective, she was being disciplined. Dependency was such an ugly word. Structure sounded better. Structure suggested intention. One night, as she counted out crumpled bills at the table, she paused. This won't be permanent, she said. Marcus didn't look up. Nothing ever is. She accepted that. Later, lying on the couch, listening to the refrigerator hum, Sarah felt something unfamiliar brush against the edges of her certainty. Not doubt. Doubt was too direct. Discomfort. She dismissed it immediately. Discomfort was the price of growth. She had always believed that. And if growth now required efficiency, then efficiency it would be. Just checking in. Sarah waited for weeks before calling her sister. Not because she was afraid. Fear would have implied vulnerability, but because timing mattered. You didn't reach out when things were unsettled. You waited until you could present a version of events that sounded intentional, controlled, reasonable. She borrowed Marcus's phone in the early afternoon when the apartment was quiet and the light coming through the blinds made everything look less worn than it was. Make it quick, Marcus said, not unkindly. I've got to call in a bit. Sarah nodded. Of course he did. Everyone always had calls. Jennifer picked up on the third ring. Sarah. Her voice carried surprise first, then relief. She tried not to overplay. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Sarah said immediately. Too immediately. She adjusted. "I mean, yes, I'm good. Just recalibrating." There was a pause on the other end. Sarah could picture her sister's face. Brows drawn together, mouth forming questions she would soften before releasing. "Recalibrating where?" Jennifer asked gently. "Out of state," Sarah said. "Just for a bit." Marcus leaned against the counter, pretending to scroll through something that wasn't there. "I needed space," Sarah continued. "To think, to rebuild. You know how I get when things feel stagnant." "I know how you get," Jennifer said carefully. "But people were worried." Sarah smiled, though Jennifer couldn't see it. "There's nothing to worry about." Another pause. Longer this time. "What about David?" Jennifer asked. Sarah's jaw tightened. "That's handled." "How?" "It just is." Jennifer exhaled slowly. "Sarah, you don't have to." "I do," Sarah interrupted, her voice still calm. "I have to do this my way." Silence stretched between them. Jennifer didn't fill it. That was her mistake. "Well," Jennifer said finally, "I'm here. Whenever you want to talk." "I know," Sarah replied. "That means a lot." Didn't. Not in the way Jennifer meant. They hung up without saying goodbye, both pretending that was normal. Sarah handed the phone back to Marcus. He didn't comment immediately. He waited until she sat down, until the moment had time to settle into shape. "They're worried," he said neutrally. "Of course they are," Sarah replied. "They always confuse concern with control." Marcus nodded as if this aligned with a theory he'd been developing. Families do that, especially when you step outside the version of you they're comfortable with. She felt a flicker of validation. Not relief, confirmation. "They wouldn't understand," he added. "Not really. And honestly, they judge you." Sarah didn't argue. There was nothing to argue with. That sentence had already lived in her head long before Marcus gave it a voice. Later that evening, messages began arriving. "Just wanted to say I'm thinking of you." No pressure to respond. "I'm here." Sarah read them all. She drafted replies. Careful, neutral, reassuring. Each one sounded false the moment she read it back. Each one implied a conversation she was not prepared to have. She deleted them. Silence, she decided, was cleaner. From the outside, it would look deliberate, a boundary, a choice. From the inside, it felt like triage. If she replied, she'd have to explain. If she explained, she'd have to admit gaps. And gaps, once acknowledged, had a way of widening. Better to let time do the work. Better to let absence speak for itself. Marcus noticed her staring at the dark phone screen later that night. "You okay?" he asked. "Yes," Sarah said. "Just tired." He accepted that. Tired people were easier to manage. They required fewer questions. In another city, Jennifer stared at her own phone, wondering how long concern was allowed to wait before it became intrusion. She chose to wait. The tether snapped quietly, the way things often do when no one pulls too hard. And Sarah, lying awake on the couch, told herself she had made the mature choice. After all, she hadn't cut anyone off. She had simply stopped reaching out. That, she believed, was very different. Negative space. Sarah Mitchell did not disappear in any way that required attention. She did not leave a trail of unpaid bills or frantic messages. She did not abandon a car on the side of the road or miss a shift anyone depended on. She simply ceased to exist in places that mattered to systems. There was no lease with her name on it. The apartment was Marcus's. Informally, questionably, but consistently. Utilities were bundled, prepaid, late, forgiven, late again. Her presence registered as background noise. She had no bank account that had been framed as efficiency. No credit card, no phone contract, no digital footprint updated in months. Her email inbox filled quietly with notices no one opened, statements, reminders, automated concern phrased as service. At the diner, she was known only by first name. Sarah, likable, reliable, paid in ways that left no record long enough to accumulate meaning. Cash, reloadable cards that expired and were replaced without ceremony. She worked, she slept, she repeated. From the outside, this did not resemble a crisis. It resembled minimalism. In Atlanta, paperwork completed its slow, indifferent arc. The police report remained filed. Inactive, no follow-ups required. No signs of distress had been reported. Adults were allowed to leave. David Mitchell did not wait. 3 days after Sarah left, he consulted an attorney. Not out of anger and not out of hope, out of habit. When systems failed emotionally, he trusted legal ones to behave predictably. The attorney, a woman with neat handwriting and no interest in dramatics, listened without interruption. David did not editorialize. He did not speculate. He presented facts. His wife had left the marital home voluntarily. She had taken a substantial sum of money. She had not provided an address. She had not responded to contact. The attorney nodded as she wrote. "This qualifies as abandonment," she said, "especially if there's no communication." "How long do I need to wait?" David asked. "You don't," she replied. "You've already waited." The paperwork was straightforward. David signed where indicated. The language was blunt in the way legal language often is. No motive, no emotion, just absence converted into terminology. Respondent vacated the marital residence. Respondent ceased participation in the marriage. Respondent cannot be reasonably located. The divorce server was dispatched within the week. The first attempt went to her mother's house. The address had been listed as an emergency contact for years. Unchanged, unquestioned, reliable. The process server knocked just after lunch. Sarah's mother, Margaret, answered in slippers, confusion already settling into her face before the man finished introducing himself. "Sarah doesn't live here," Margaret said immediately. "She hasn't since she got married." The server asked if she knew where her daughter was staying now. Margaret hesitated. That hesitation said everything. "I don't," she admitted. "She hasn't called." The paperwork was marked accordingly. Later that evening, Margaret called David. Her voice was strained, tight with the kind of concern that tries very hard not to sound accusatory. "I spoke to someone today," she said. "About Sarah?" "Yes," David replied. "They said it was about divorce papers," Margaret continued. "David, maybe you should wait. She's probably confused. She always does this when she thinks she's making a point. If you give her time." "No," David said. The word landed flat. Not loud, not emotional. Final. "She stole from me," he continued. "I'm not waiting for a thief to decide when she wants to come back." Margaret inhaled sharply. "She's my daughter. And she was my wife," David replied. Past tense. There was silence on the line. Margaret tried again, softer now. "I don't even know how to reach her," she said. "If I could talk to her, if I could tell her to come home." "She didn't tell you where she went," David said. It wasn't a question. "No," Margaret whispered. "That was her choice," David said. "So was taking the money. I'm not protecting her from consequences." Margaret said nothing after that. There was nothing left to say. When the call ended, she sat at her kitchen table staring at the phone, willing it to ring. Didn't. She had no address to forward, no number to call, no way to tell her daughter that she should come home, that things could still be repaired. That pride was a terrible currency. All she had was absence. The second attempt went to an address pulled from old records. A forwarding request returned nothing. On the third attempt, the process server filed an affidavit. Due diligence exercised. Respondent unable to be located. The box was checked. Margaret kept her phone close for weeks after that, answering every unknown number, hoping one of them would be Sarah. None were. From the court's perspective, the case was clean. From Margaret's perspective, her daughter had not disappeared. She had chosen not to be reachable, and there was nothing a mother could do about that. David did not attend the hearing in person. His attorney appeared on his behalf. The judge reviewed the file, glanced at the affidavit, and nodded once. "No contest," the judge said. "Proceed." The marriage ended not with a confrontation, but with a stamp. Assets had already been secured. Accounts separated, liabilities assigned. The house remained where it had always been, quiet, maintained, unoccupied by drama. When David received the final decree, he read it once, folded it carefully, and placed it in the same drawer as the police report. 2 documents, both factual, neither accusatory. From the court's perspective, the case was clean. From the system's perspective, Sarah had chosen absence. And from David's perspective, the marriage had ended the only way it could. Without her. The court accepted it without commentary. David's attorney nodded when the update arrived. That happens. No one asked where Sarah had gone. The question was unnecessary. The system did not require narrative, only compliance. Jennifer noticed the absence the way people noticed the removal of a familiar object. Not with alarm, but with an unsettled sense of misplacement. Sarah's silence extended from weeks into months. Jennifer told herself that space was intentional. Sarah had always been decisive. If she wanted to be found, she would have reached out. That assumption did most of the work. No missing person report was filed. Sarah had not asked for help. She had not indicated danger. She had simply gone quiet. Without a sign of danger, there was nothing to report, only absence, which the system does not investigate. Quiet was not actionable. Marcus never referred to Sarah as hidden. That word implied effort. Instead, he spoke of her as streamlined. Less noise, he said once when she asked about her phone again. More focus. She accepted this framing. It aligned with her self-image. She had always admired people who could shed unnecessary layers. The days blended together, not painfully, efficiently. Morning light through blinds, the smell of fryer oil clinging to her clothes, counting out bills at night, handing them over, sleeping on the couch without dreaming. There were moments, small, inconvenient moments, when Sarah felt the shape of herself missing. A question she no longer had anyone to answer to. A memory that required context she no longer possessed. She pushed those aside. Reflection was indulgent. She was busy surviving something she refused to name. From the system's perspective, everything was functioning. No red flags, no alerts, no urgency. Sarah Mitchell was not lost. She was simply unaccounted for, and the world built to reward efficiency over empathy did not notice the difference. Observation. 21 months passed. David Mitchell did not go looking for Sarah. He was in Memphis for a 3-day business trip. Routine, forgettable, efficiently scheduled. A supplier meeting ran long. Lunch was delayed. He cut through a side street he didn't normally take, looking for somewhere unremarkable to eat. That was when he saw her. Not immediately as her. Not as memory, as shape first, as movement. She was stepping out of a diner, squinting against the afternoon light, wiping her hands on an apron that had seen better years. She moved carefully, as if every action now required prior approval from her body. He slowed without realizing it, pulled over, parked. Then recognition arrived. Sarah. He didn't feel shock or grief, or the cinematic rush people imagine accompanies moments like this. What he felt was alignment. Facts clicking into place with the quiet satisfaction of a solved equation. She was obese now, not ambiguously heavier, not put on some weight. This was systemic health rewritten by neglect and resignation. Her face carried inflammation rather than emotion. Her eyes were alert but dulled, like someone who had learned to conserve reactions. She did not look lost. She looked managed. David stayed in the car. He did not consider approaching her. That idea never formed fully enough to be tempting. Approaching implied intervention. Intervention implied dialogue. Dialogue implied a version of the past re-entering the present. He had no interest in reopening systems that had already closed themselves. Instead, he watched. Sarah lit a cigarette with hands that shook just enough to be noticeable. She took one drag too many, coughed, steadied herself against the wall. There was no drama in it, just erosion. A few minutes later, Marcus appeared. David recognized him immediately, not from photos, but from pattern, the posture of entitlement, the slack confidence of someone who controlled without effort. Marcus leaned against the brick wall near the back entrance. said something David couldn't hear. Sarah snapped back. That surprised him. Her shoulders stiffened. Her hands moved sharply. She pointed. Marcus laughed. Short, dismissive, said something else. Sarah's face flushed. She said more, faster now. They were fighting. Not theatrically, not loudly. The way people fight when the argument is routine and the outcome predetermined. Marcus stepped closer. Not touching her. Never touching her. Control didn't require proximity. Sarah flinched anyway. David felt something then. Not pity, satisfaction. This was not cruelty. It was confirmation. He watched Marcus gesture toward the apartment across the street. Sarah shook her head. Marcus raised his voice just enough to tip the balance. Sarah folded, reached into her pocket, pulled out an envelope, handed it over. Marcus didn't open it. He didn't have to. Sarah turned back toward the diner, shoulders slumped now, anger already repurposed into compliance. Marcus followed at a distance that made it clear who set the pace. David stayed exactly where he was. He watched them disappear inside, waited, followed at a distance when her shift ended. Saw where they lived, saw the routine, the repetition, the containment. He didn't follow her every night. One cycle was enough. This wasn't captivity. This was consequence. He imagined saying her name, the way her head would snap up, the immediate recalculation, the reflexive insistence. This isn't what it looks like. I'm fine. I chose this. She would never say I was wrong. She would rather rot intact than fracture publicly. David smiled once, small, private. He had not been spared this ending. He had escaped it. He waited until the lights in the apartment went out. Then he started the car. This was not punishment. It was resolution. Some people needed saving. Others needed exactly what they built. David drove back to his hotel, lighter than he'd felt in years. Satisfied not because Sarah was suffering, but because he finally understood that her suffering had nothing to do with him and never had. David walked away because some people need exactly what they chose. Was he right? Let us know in the comments. Like and subscribe for more stories like this.